He ran for his life, barefoot across burning rock, lungs scraping for air as the desert sun burned overhead. Behind him, hooves beat the earth like war drums. He didn't know how many followed, or how far the nearest border was. He only knew what he'd been told before they cut the ropes. If you make it past the ridge, you live. The ridge was 10 miles away. He didn't make it. And as you listen now, maybe you're far from that desert heat. Perhaps in Phoenix, stepping out for your morning coffee, or in Chicago, closing your laptop after a long day, or maybe in Sydney, lying back as the sun rises outside your window. Wherever you are, this story reaches across centuries of dust and fire. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and if you want to keep exploring the hidden sides of native history, subscribe. It truly helps keep these stories alive. Now back to the desert. This was not a trick of cruelty, nor an accident of war. For the Apache, this was a method, a calculated, often repeated trial known among outsiders as the run for freedom. It was not always offered. It was not always real. But when it happened, it was unforgettable. Warriors remembered it. Prisoners feared it. And generations later, settlers would whisper stories of captives hunted like animals in the high desert. But these stories, passed through fear, rarely explained why. Why would an Apache warband let an enemy go only to chase him down? What did it mean to them, not just to those who died? To understand that we must look not at the chase, but at the captives, and what captivity truly meant in Apache life. Among the Apache, captivity was not chaos. It followed patterns, rules, even if they were unspoken. The Apache were raiders by necessity, not sport. Resources were scarce, land was contested, and survival required aggression. During raids, they took horses, weapons, supplies, and sometimes people. Captives might be enemy warriors, rival scouts, Mexican settlers, Pueblo villagers, or even children taken in retaliation. What happened next was rarely random. Some were ransomed. Others, especially young captives, could be adopted into the tribe, renamed and raised as Apache. A few, particularly those who resisted, were tortured or executed. But for adult male prisoners, especially enemy combatants, the outcomes were often severe. The run was one of those outcomes, but not the only one. Sometimes it was punishment. Sometimes it was a test. And sometimes it was simply entertainment for a warband hardened by years of bloodshed. The decision to make a prisoner run was not made lightly, but once made, it was carried out with precision. There was meaning in it, cultural, strategic, and psychological. The Apache had lived this way for generations. But what made a war party choose the run over the knife? And what were prisoners told just before the chase began? The answer often depended on the prisoner himself and the needs of the moment. If the captive was a warrior from a rival tribe that had recently attacked Apache settlements, execution might be swift and public. But if he was seen as strong, valuable, or symbolic, the run became an option. It offered a spectacle, a challenge, and in rare cases a twisted form of opportunity. A prisoner might be told, if you reach that ridge, or if you make it until sundown, he would live. No food, no water, often no shoes, and sometimes wounded from capture. The prisoner would be set loose into terrain the Apache knew better than any map could show. Warriors would follow silently, sometimes allowing him hope before striking. Occasionally they tested the man's will, not just how far he could run, but how he'd face death when caught. Those who begged might be mocked. Those who resisted to the end were at times remembered. To outsiders, this seemed like cruelty for cruelty's sake. But to the Apache, it was more layered, a ritual of strength, fear, and tribal memory. And it was never carried out without the eyes of warriors, young and old, watching. These hunts were not always impulsive acts. In many Apache camps, the decision to make a prisoner run was a group choice. Elders, respected warriors, or even spiritual figures might weigh in. The captive's origin mattered. Was he from a tribe that had broken a treaty? Was he involved in the killing of an Apache leader? Had he fought with honor or cowardice? All of these could influence the verdict. When the decision was made, preparations were brief but intentional. The prisoner was often held overnight, guarded closely but fed and given water. Not out of mercy, but to ensure the trial was not over before it began. At dawn or dusk, depending on the terrain and weather, he would be led out beyond the camp and the conditions of the run would be spoken. Sometimes clearly, sometimes with riddles. Some Apache saw this as a test of fate. others as a rite of vengeance, but all agreed it was a lesson for the young. Boys close to warrior age would be brought to watch or even join the final moments. In their silence, a message was being passed down, what it means to be feared and what it costs to earn it. Captivity among the Apache was never about mercy, but it wasn't always about death either. Their relationship with captives was pragmatic, shaped by need, culture, and circumstance. While Mexican, Spanish, and American sources often describe these practices with horror, they rarely understood the logic beneath them. In Apache thought, not all enemies were equal, and not all punishments were meant to destroy. The run for freedom held multiple purposes. It tested the physical limits of the prisoner, displayed the dominance of the warband, trained younger fighters in stealth and pursuit, and sent a message to rival groups. We control life and death here. But perhaps most importantly, it gave the tribe a story, a narrative of the hunt, the escape, the ending. These stories passed from mouth to mouth in winter camps, shaping identity and reputation. Captivity, then, was more than a result of conflict. It was a tool in the Apache worldview, a brutal one, yes, but not mindless. And now, having understood what captivity meant, we can turn fully to the core question of this story. What exactly happened when the Apache told a man to run? And how did they turn his final steps into a deadly pursuit? The chase rarely began in chaos. The prisoner was not surprised in the middle of the night or pushed into the wild without warning. Instead, he was often led to an open area just beyond camp, unbound and given a simple instruction. Sometimes it was, run. Sometimes it was more specific, reach the canyon mouth before sundown. In rare cases, a prisoner was allowed a small advantage, water in his hands or a weapon even if broken. But the outcome was rarely in doubt. Apache warriors had the advantage of numbers, knowledge of the land and silence. The man running did not know which direction was safest or how closely he was being followed. He could not stop. The moment his legs moved, the trial began. To the Apache, this was not a game. It was a display. It tested their own skills as much as the prisoners. Warriors used it to train endurance, stalking, and ambush. They often followed without sound, letting the runner think he was escaping before making the kill. And while some captives begged or froze, others ran with everything they had. Their final moments would determine not only how they died, but how they were remembered, if at all. The terrain chosen for these hunts was deliberate. Apache warriors selected landscapes that gave them control. Open plains for visibility, canyons for echo and entrapment, or scrublands where dust trails could be tracked. The prisoner never knew the layout. He might flee into a ravine that narrowed to a dead end or climb a ridge only to find no way down. Meanwhile, the warriors followed on foot or horseback, sometimes splitting into small groups. Young men proving themselves might be allowed to lead the pursuit. Others held back, waiting to flank or finish the exhausted captive later. Often no sound was made. The prisoner would run until his lungs burned, unaware that the men tracking him could hear his every step. If the captive stopped, they waited. If he fought, they closed in. In some instances, the chase lasted minutes, in others, hours. The goal was not always a clean kill, it was the process. Warriors remembered these runs as moments of learning and dominance. For the prisoner, it was a race with no finish line. His only hope was distance, and even that was a trick. There was nowhere to go. The Apache had already decided how this run would end. Occasionally, a prisoner surprised them. He might reach higher ground, find a stream to mask his scent, or double back to confuse his pursuers. These rare cases created stories. Warriors who had chased such men remembered them, retelling the details during winter gatherings or campfire nights. But even in success, the captive's fate did not change. No matter how well he ran or how clever his movements, the run was not meant to be won. It was not a contract. It was a sentence carried out through performance. Warriors admired a strong enemy, but strength did not earn freedom. In the rare event a man survived past the agreed mark, such as reaching a ridgeline or surviving until dusk, he might be recaptured and executed quickly, without ceremony. In even rarer cases, the war leader might call for his sparing, not out of mercy, but as a trophy of the chase. His survival would serve as proof of the warrior's control, not the prisoner's success. But these outcomes were exceptions. Most runs ended the same way. The captive exhausted, cornered, and dispatched in silence. The lesson was clear to the tribe, to the watching youth, and to the captive tribes whose warriors might be next. Some Apache groups added variation to the run depending on who was watching. If a rival band was nearby, or if messages needed to be sent, the run might be extended, slowed, or even staged. In these instances, warriors might let the captive escape briefly before surrounding him again, drawing out the chase into multiple phases. This allowed younger fighters to participate and learn formation movement, ambush timing, and cooperative tracking. The captive, unknowingly, became part of a military lesson. These staged runs were rare, but documented in several oral accounts, particularly among the Mescalero and Chiricahua. In some cases, older warriors would narrate the hunt to observing boys, pointing out the prisoner's mistakes or strengths. "Watch how he steps. He's limping. Watch the dust. He does not know the wind." These details became future lessons. Even in death, the captive served a role in the Apache world. His actions, his failures, his final stand became material for future warriors to study. To the outside world, these chases seemed cruel. But within the camp, they were structured, observed, and remembered. The line between punishment, training, and ritual blurred. And for every warrior present, one truth remained. The run was never just for the runner. As night fell over the high desert, the final stage of the chase often arrived. If the captive survived until dusk, he faced new dangers. Darkness favored the Apache even more than daylight. They moved silently between rocks, listening for every breath, every twig snapped underfoot. The prisoner, already exhausted, now had no light to guide him. Some froze, hoping to avoid detection. Others continued blindly, stumbling through thornbrush and uneven rock. If the Apache chose, they could end it swiftly, but often they waited. Silence itself became a weapon, letting fear take hold before the final strike. The end was quick. A knife, a club, sometimes a thrown spear. No ceremony, no words. And by morning the body was often gone, buried shallow or left as a message. The camp would return to normal. Children would play, fires would be lit, and the warriors would speak little of what had passed, except in lessons. For the prisoner, the run had been everything. For the Apache, it had been a day of use, of training, memory, and control. The tribe had moved one step further in its long, hard survival, and tomorrow another captive might be told the same thing: run and earn your fate. Not all freedom runs followed the same script. The Apache adapted their methods to the land and the moment. In mountainous areas, prisoners were sometimes led to narrow ridges where loose stones made running dangerous. Slops could collapse, and one wrong step meant a fall. In open plains, the chase was faster, sometimes involving mounted warriors who herded the captive like buffalo. In wooded areas, ambushes were possible. Warriors could vanish behind trees and reappear without sound. The environment shaped the run, but the Apache also varied the rules. In some instances, the prisoner was given a knife or broken spear. Sometimes he was told to run without looking back. Other times, the warrior behind him would speak throughout the chase, testing his mind as much as his body. These variations weren't random. They were tailored to what the war leader wanted to teach, test, or prove. No two runs were identical. Even the outcome could shift. A prisoner who showed cleverness might earn an extra hour of life. One who refused to run could be killed on the spot, or mocked and forced to run anyway. The run was never just punishment. It was also a reflection of the Apache's mastery over war and land. Tracking during these chases was a refined skill passed down through generations. Apache warriors could read dust, rock, and shadow like written language. A broken branch, a displaced pebble, the angle of a footprint. Each sign told them how far ahead the prisoner was, whether he was slowing, and which way he might turn next. Young warriors learned to move without leaving a mark, while seniors taught them how to follow a man even across hard stone. The best trackers could read signs others missed, the pattern of a sweat trail on a rock, or the slight difference in the way disturbed grass stood back up. These skills weren't just used in prisoner hunts, they were part of raiding, defense, and survival, but during the run they became a demonstration. Watching boys were shown how to follow without speaking, how to signal silently, and how to flank a target who had no idea he was surrounded. The prisoner often imagined himself alone, but he never was. Even when no footsteps could be heard, the Apache were there, patient, fast, and invisible. The run wasn't just about endurance. It was about exposure, and the desert with all its silence favored those who listened closely. In some cases, the Apache used the run not only to punish, but to test. If a prisoner was strong, young, and of a useful tribe, the run might serve as a final trial before deciding his fate. The run became a decision tool, not to let the man escape, but to see what he was made of. Could he endure? Did he show fear? Would he give up or fight until the end? Such qualities mattered if adoption was being considered. While rare, there are recorded instances where captives were taken in after surviving a difficult run, not as equals but as slaves or labourers, and in some cases eventual adoptees. The run filtered the weak from the strong. But even in these cases the test was brutal. The prisoner was not told this was a test. He ran thinking his life was ending. Only afterward, if he impressed the watchers, did his fate shift. Among the Mescalero Apache, one war leader reportedly said, "A man who cannot run from death cannot walk with us." In this way, the run served more than vengeance. It shaped who was allowed to live under Apache law, even when that life would never be truly free. Terrain also offered tactical options. In dry desert basins where wind scattered footprints, Apache trackers would use scent and sound. A careless prisoner might spill water, leaving a trail for flies. In pine-covered highlands, warriors relied on the echo of broken branches or bird calls to pinpoint movement. Some Apache would send birds ahead, or interpret their sudden flight patterns. In flatlands, dust told the story, how fast the captive moved, whether he fell or whether he tried to double back. These signs were taught from youth, but sharpened during real hunts. The run gave warriors a live target, unpredictable, panicked, and unfamiliar with the land. It also gave them a chance to work in teams. One group might drive the captive toward a narrow pass, where another waited. A third might follow behind, pressing him faster. This coordinated effort taught warriors how to corner an enemy without words. In later raids against enemy tribes or settlers, these same techniques would be used. The run, then, was more than execution. It was military preparation. Every rock, trail, and bluff became part of a lesson. For the Apache, land was a weapon, and the prisoner unknowingly was helping sharpen it. While most prisoners never knew it, some runs were used to train more than just fighters. They trained leaders. A war leader might assign parts of the chase to different warriors, judging how well they controlled their group, communicated silently, and made decisions under pressure. This internal observation shaped future promotions. A young man who could flank quietly, strike cleanly, or adjust tactics mid-chase might be seen as worthy of future command. The prisoner, in these cases, became a test subject for leadership. No Apache warrior ever spoke of mercy during such runs, but many spoke of discipline. Killing too early was seen as wasteful. Letting a man believe he had hope, only to take it later, required control. Impulse was discouraged. Even cruelty had to be managed. The best warriors were not only deadly, they were composed. Watching elders and senior fighters noted everything: the angle of attack, the patience shown, and the ability to follow the plan. In this way, the run was as much a trial for the Apache as it was for the captive. Both sides were being judged. One ran for his life, the other ran to prove he deserved the power to take it. Not every prisoner who ran was killed. While most freedom runs ended in execution, a few captives survived long enough to change their fate. In some cases, warriors or elders stopped the chase, not because the captive had escaped, but because he had proven something. If he showed endurance, clever use of terrain, or bravery under pressure, his death was no longer guaranteed. Instead, he might be recaptured, restrained, and returned to camp. There, elders or the war leader would decide his future. The options varied. Some were beaten and enslaved, used for labor until they collapsed. Others were assigned to households as property. But in rare cases, especially if the captive was young or adaptable, he could be adopted. This did not mean freedom. His name, language, and past were erased. He would live as Apache, but always on the edge, never fully trusted, but not entirely rejected. Children were more likely to be adopted than adults, but a strong adult male might earn that chance through his actions during the run. It was a gamble, unknown to the runner himself. He ran believing he would die, but if he survived, he became part of the tribe's future, shaped by his trial. Death was far more common than adoption, and it came in many forms. Some prisoners were killed during the run, speared or clubbed without a word. Others were caught, bound again, and executed in camp. These executions were not always public, but when they were, they followed a grim pattern. Warriors gathered in a half-circle. The captive was brought to the centre, and a designated man delivered the final blow, often with a stone war club or knife. No speeches were made, no last words were offered. The act was swift and unceremonious, yet carried weight. For younger warriors watching, it reinforced the tribe's authority. For elders, it marked the end of a lesson. Occasionally, if the captive had fought well, a mark of respect was shown, his body left intact, or his clothing buried with him. But often, the corpse was left where it fell. It was not a matter of cruelty, but message. Any enemy who came near Apache territory would know what had happened. These acts were not hidden. They were meant to be seen. The run was only one part of the process. What came after, judgment or death, completed the Apache's expression of control over outsiders. Adoption, when it occurred, was a complete transformation. A child taken from a raid might be renamed the same day. His hair would be cut in Apache style, his clothing replaced with buckskin, and he would be taught the language from scratch. He was no longer who he had been. Adults had a harder path. If allowed to live, they might serve in silence for years, hauling water, cutting wood, tending animals. Over time, if they showed discipline and obedience, they might be allowed to sit at the edge of the fire, join hunting trips, or learn ceremonial roles. But they would never forget how they arrived. The run, the chase, the near-death moment. It remained a permanent scar, even if their body survived. Some oral traditions speak of adopted men who rose in rank, even taking wives. Others remained on the margins for life. Their survival depended on usefulness, behaviour, and how deep the hatred had run during capture. For the Apache, identity could be reshaped, but never fully erased. Blood mattered, origin mattered. But a man who endured the run and accepted his place might carve a new path. Even so, his presence always reminded the tribe of the cost of mercy. There were also cases where the Apache used the run as a political statement. If a captured warrior came from a rival band involved in recent conflict, the chase might be extended, made visible, or discussed afterward with other groups. The way the prisoner died, how far he made it, who killed him, whether he was shown mercy, could all be used to send a message. It might say, "We are stronger." It might say, "This is how we treat betrayal." These acts of display weren't theatrical. They were communicative. Apache society didn't rely on written declarations or treaties in the same way colonial powers did. Their messages were physical, remembered, and shared through story. One war leader's decision during a prisoner's run might be discussed for years across multiple camps. Outsiders often misunderstood this. They saw only violence. But within Apache circles, the meaning was layered. The prisoner was not just an enemy. He was a symbol. His final steps told a story crafted by his captors. And in this way, the Apache controlled not only the body, but the narrative. Every decision. How far to let him run, whether to spare him, whether to bury him, became a tool of tribal diplomacy and memory. As darkness returned to the desert, the tribe would resume its rhythm. Fires were lit, food was shared, and children laughed in the distance. The day's chase was rarely spoken of directly. Warriors who participated might clean their weapons in silence. Elders who witnessed it would return to their mats, eyes closed in thought. If a captive had survived, he was watched closely. If he had died, his absence needed no words. The Apache did not record these events in writing, but the memory lived in the behaviours that followed. Boys who had watched grew quieter. Women looked longer at the edge of camp. Everyone had seen what power looked like and what it cost. These moments shaped identity, taught loyalty, and reinforced unity. The run was not the end of something. It was a continuation, a cycle that renewed discipline, purpose, and fear in equal parts. Among the Chiricahua, it was said that to watch a man run was to remember why you don't. In the quiet of night, the desert held that memory, and though the captives were gone, their footsteps remained, in dust, in story, and in the sharpened readiness of the warriors who would rise again tomorrow. Stories of the Apache Freedom Run did not stay within the tribe. They spread through enemy camps, settler journals, and military reports. Most who told them were not Apache. They were survivors, scouts, or soldiers who had heard of the practice secondhand or claimed to have witnessed it. In these retellings, the details changed. The runs became more violent, more theatrical, and more focused on cruelty than context. Captives were described as tortured playthings, hunted for sport or chased for entertainment. These accounts often missed the structured, intentional nature of the run. They ignored the training, discipline, and judgment involved. The Apache, seen through the lens of fear and conflict, became monsters in frontier folklore. For settlers and US troops, these stories served a purpose. They justified retaliation, removal, and extermination campaigns. Savage acts became political tools, but the truth was more complex. The Apache did not run these trials out of mindless violence. Each decision had roots in survival, defense, and legacy. Yet the outside world rarely asked why. They only saw the outcome, a dead man on the sand and no explanation. And so the legend of the prisoner run grew larger than its reality. Part truth, part myth, and deeply misunderstood. Within Apache communities, the memory of the run remained, but it was never glorified. It lived in quiet references, in training lessons for young warriors, and in the silence of elders who had once seen it unfold. These memories were not told with pride or regret. They were simply held. Among the Chiricahua and Mescalero, such stories were not public entertainment. They were instructional. They showed what could happen in war, what was necessary for survival, and what standards were expected. The run was a reminder that mercy, when given, was not weakness, but that mercy had to be earned. For modern Apache descendants, the topic remained sensitive. It is part of a larger history of resistance, struggle, and cultural identity. Many oral historians within the tribes caution against dramatizing or simplifying what the run meant. It was never sport. It was never spectacle. It was survival made visible. To understand it is to understand the pressure of living in a world surrounded by enemies, where every decision could mean death for your family, your camp, your people. The prisoner run was brutal, yes, but it was not chaos. It followed a code. And among the Apache, code mattered more than fear. Over time, the prisoner run became part of a wider set of frontier myths. Dime novels, settler memoirs, and military reports from the 1800s portrayed the Apache as ruthless killers who hunted men for amusement. These stories sold well. They turned Apache warriors into villains, their tactics into atrocities, and erased the strategic logic behind their actions. Lost in this retelling was the reality that the Apache fought out of necessity, not cruelty. That they tracked, hunted, and killed because their world demanded it. In the same period, settlers were burning Apache camps, killing women and children, and forcing entire bands into starvation. But these acts were often excluded from the stories. The Apache run survived in white memory not as cultural practice, but as warning. Look what they do, people said. This is why they must be stopped. The truth was more balanced, but harder to publish. Tribal law, vengeance, and tactical training didn't make for easy headlines. The result was a distorted history, one that painted a feared people in strokes of savagery, while hiding the frontier's shared violence. The Apache knew what they were doing, but only they knew why. And outside voices never stopped long enough to ask. Today, the story of the prisoner run still appears, sometimes in textbooks, sometimes in documentaries, and often in online spaces where history blends with fiction. Much of what is repeated remains disconnected from Apache voices. Few tribal elders speak openly about these practices, and even fewer endorse public retellings. It was a private matter, shaped by war, loss, and cultural survival. Outsiders who attempt to describe it often fall into one of two traps, either romanticizing it as a noble savage ritual or condemning it as savage cruelty. Neither view captures the truth. For Apache descendants, the run represents a painful legacy. It is part of the cost paid to remain sovereign, to protect identity, and to resist domination. Talking about it requires trust, something not easily given to those who once used the story as a weapon. Yet, there is value in telling it correctly. Not for shock, not for drama, but for clarity. The run reveals what it took to survive in a time when being Apache meant being hunted, and by preserving that truth, even in silence, the people remember what it means to endure. The footsteps of the past are not forgotten. They are simply unspoken until someone is ready to listen. The Freedom Run, as remembered by the Apache, was never about freedom. It was about judgment. It was about drawing a line between enemy and kin, between chaos and order, between memory and oblivion. Every man who was made to run carried the weight of that line. He became a lesson for those who watched, a decision for those who led, and a reflection of what it meant to be outside the circle of trust. In that sense, the run was not just a punishment, it was a ceremony of limits. The Apache no longer practiced this right. It belonged to a time when survival demanded hard choices and harsh displays, but its memory lives, quietly, carefully, without decoration. In every story told around a winter fire, in every warning passed from elder to youth, the lessons endure. Among outsiders, it may remain misunderstood. But among the people who lived it, the message was always clear. To run was not to escape. It was to be seen. It was to be measured. And in being measured, the prisoner became part of something larger, a history carved not in stone, but in footsteps across the dust, where silence was louder than words. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your time here. If you'd like to hear more quiet history like this, consider subscribing. Your support truly means a lot.